Charles Chaput from Denver, who, by the way, wrote an excellent book that I encourage you to read. It's called Render Unto Caesar, Serving the Nation by Living Our Catholic Beliefs in Political Life. So this interview that I found on Zenit in the interview, Bishop Chaput said, "The idea of forcing religion out of public policy debates is not only unwise, it is anti-democratic." Democratic. There's some words I have. So the separation of church and state does not mean separating faith from debates on political issues. It does not rule out an important Canadian history, a reality in our history, and that is the cooperation of church and state. And to live out such cooperation, one must recognize that both religion and state concern the same people and have an important contribution to make in building society, each in its own way. The contribution is different. And this is all part of a healthy social ordering, which respects our diversity and guarantees that citizens have the right to freely follow their own religious faith in private as well as in the public square, without having to separate their religious and moral convictions from their professional and political decisions and choices. There is not, and there should not be, in Canadian law or theory, there should not be a principle that places the beliefs of and the ethics of atheists and agnostics in a superior position in the public sphere to the beliefs and the ethics of religious citizens. In recent years, however, the number of incidents that go against our freedom of conscience and religion has increased. I'm sure you have some examples in mind, and I'll just give you a few here. These incidents often touch on issues linked to the life of the family and to life in general. Here are a few examples. On a number of university campuses, student pro-life clubs are having to fight with student associations that refuse to recognize or want to take away their official status. And they don't want to give them funding either. Student members of these clubs are being threatened with expulsion for organizing an exhibition of photographies lately comparing abortion to genocide. This was in Carleton University. So now the pro-life club is, if you go on YouTube or if you Google whatever, the Carleton University, the pro-life club, you'll see them are being arrested. It's very interesting. It's very terrifying in a way. You know? So, but this group, this pro-life club of Carleton University is now suing the university. Anyhow, that's where we're getting to now. Some colleges of physicians require that members who refuse to perform abortions refer patients to another physician who will do the abortion. In Quebec, I mentioned before the ethics course, culture, religious education and ethics. So parents are now in Supreme Court of Canada to defend their right to bring up their children the way they want and not to have other religious views imposed on their children from kindergarten to the end of high school. You know. So they're in Supreme Court. In Saskatchewan in 2005, Commissioner Orville Nichols was fired for refusing to marry same-sex couples. And in British Columbia, Manitoba, Newfoundland, Saskatchewan, marriage commissions must now perform gay marriages or resign. These are all examples where freedom of religion is being, neglected or not taken into account, not respected. Now, faced with these types of events, we just, as Catholics, we can't just stand there and do nothing. Like, we can't stay silent when we're faced with that type of ideology that, under the pretext of giving everybody an equal place in our culture, attempts to silence Christians and to exclude them from public life, from societal debates, from places of learning. This false pluralism is another challenge for us as disciples of Christ. We must love freedom enough to refuse to be excluded from the public forum because of our deepest beliefs. The problem is not, and now I'm quoting Cardinal Ryalko, who's president of the Pontifical Council for the Laity. He says, the problem is not being a minority, but rather having deliberately become marginal, insignificant, through our lack of courage and our mediocrity, in order to be left alone. Archbishop Prendergast from Ottawa in 2009 spoke at a seminar in bioethics organized by C.O.L.F. And he had very strong words that summarize the situation. He said this: "We are at war. But the war we fight," I'm quoting him, "but the war we fight as Christians will not end until the world ends. It's a fact of faith, clear as can be in the Word of God. Jesus himself says he comes to bring not peace on earth, but division. St. Paul teaches that our struggle is not against flesh and blood enemies, but against the spiritual forces of evil. However, this is no ordinary war, because the Lord has already won the victory. We can't be defeated. The danger is that we will surrender. Defeat is only possible if we give in and give up." End of quote. So, as Christians of the third millennium, we cannot yield to indifference or to fear. We cannot stoop to this conspiracy of silence. Christ calls us as full-fledged citizens to take up our political responsibilities and to address the problems in our society with solutions inspired by justice and charity. We are called to propose, not to impose, to propose a vision of things and solutions to social problems that are inspired by gospel values. Quite interestingly, our society is a lot. It's very much similar to the one in which the first Christians lived. They too had to find the courage to go against the current. They were countercultural also. The daring of the first Christians is an example that calls us to go against the tide and to build a family culture, a civilization that respects the sacred character of life and the dignity of each person. In this book that I really like a lot, it's called In Conversation with God, there was a quote at one point that I found concerning the first Christians, and this is it. The first Christians rejected the customs and behaviors that were incompatible with the faith that they had received, the new faith that they had newly received, although they never felt out of place in the society to which they rightfully belonged. The first Christians did not seek isolation, which is always a temptation, nor did they put up barriers to hide behind and defend themselves in times of fierce persecution. Their attitude during these trials was neither pugnacious nor faint-hearted. They were serene and, like yeast, unapparent within the mass of society. The Christian presence in the world was a radical affirmation. and all the fury of the persecutors was incapable of shaking the serene and positive attitudes of Christians. They were exemplary citizens. The first Christians were not just good Christians. They were exemplary because their duties as citizens were the obligations of a well-formed conscience. Fulfilling their obligations, they sanctified themselves, and we're all called to be saints. So now, it's our turn. The time has come for us to stand up. Some of you have stood up, most of you have stood up, maybe all of you have stood up. But we have to encourage our friends and families and other believers to stand up, to dare to speak up in the social and cultural arena about the real nature of the family, for example. We have to gather together to celebrate and to defend the identity of the family, while demanding that our constitutional and natural rights be respected, especially our rights of freedom, conscience, expression, and our right to educate our children in conformity with our moral and religious convictions. It's up really to all of us to get together and to develop a culture and legislation that will benefit the family. The family is the foundation of society. So we need to stand up and fight for legislation that will, promote our rights and the real identity of the family in a vision that is consistent with the gospel. Family associations will be more effective if they work together to defend and promote their rights. So we need to create family associations where they don't exist. In Europe, it's surprising. I've come across, not that I've traveled to Europe much, but in research, on the internet and all that, there are organized family organizations that are very strong, and sometimes they really work together in order to get what they want from governments. Now, one very important element is necessary if we hope to bring about a much-needed cultural renewal.